Yes, Barb.
It'd be helpful. Can you describe a student in your school system and what these kinds of services mean? I think there are stereotypes from when I was in high school and elementary school about what a special education student is and what kind of challenges they face. But I think maybe today it's not quite so visible, would you say? So if you could give us some stories about
some of the students, sure. Actually, this morning I was at an IEP for a 7th grade student, and this is a boy that has ADHD, and he's been struggling in the typical or traditional classroom setting for a number of years due to his his inability to quietly sit and learn, and we put in many different supports for him. And so he receives social work support, he receives teacher consultant support, and those are special education providers that are working with him in the general education classroom. So he's not pulled out to a special room anywhere, but he's able to function right in the classroom with those supports. And so it was really heartwarming because I remember him when he was in elementary school and really struggling, and now he's doing very well. His grades are pretty well, or doing pretty well in his grades, but also in his ability to advocate for himself. And that's what we talked about a lot today. He has a planner. He is going around to all of his teachers, making sure he has his assignments, and he's then taking that home, and he's much more responsible and really taking ownership of his learning. So it was a really nice success story, I guess, to see how well he's done and how far he's come since elementary school. So there are many, many students on the spectrum, well, it's a continuum of services, and so there are many different.
That's fabulous.
And I can give you another example. I will give you an example from Celine because I'm more intimate there right now in terms of my involvement, but we run a life skills program out of Celine High School, and this is a more severely impaired program for students who are not inclusion programs inside of the classroom, but we run a program that runs parallel to that. These students require a great amount of support, so we have to hire multiple paraeducators and support people for that room, for behaviors, for safety reasons, and those kinds of things. We do take those students out in the community, so we're utilizing a life skills program to get them into grocery stores or to go to the swimming pool or to place their own order at a restaurant and those kinds of things. To do that, we need more people, so we hire more people to help those students. We also have some students that we have individualized programming for, that we have to take those students outside of the school and maybe bus them or transport them to our rec center, and so you have the additional cost for the additional transportation. Some students have a shortened day, so another additional cost for transportation for students who just can't sustain a whole day of school. And so the program is phenomenal. It does require probably the heaviest level of support and resources wrapped around that program versus a student that may have learning disabilities inside of a classroom. So this continuum exists, and then there's these levels of resources that we need to apply to that continuum depending on the disabilities.
Yeah, one of the things also to remember is that we provide services to babies, so birth to 3. So we go into the homes and work with families that have babies that have disabilities that we know of, cleft palates, Down syndrome, things like that we know right away. And then on the other end, we have these young adults, and working with the young adults and having them learn independent skills like Scott was talking about, working in the community, getting acclimated to the community, so when they leave us at 26, they can still be an active part of the community.
We actually had one of our young adults, along with some staff, go up and give testimony at the State Board of Education meeting this month to talk about the value of the services. The young man is living independently, able to use public transportation, productively employed, and he was able to develop those skills through the support and services of the programs that we're able to offer. And so it's nice to be able to recognize those kinds of successes. And then, you know, one of our justices on the Supreme Court, Mr. Bernstein, has a visual impairment, and he'll speak passionately about the importance of early interventions and recognizing that disabilities doesn't mean that you are cognitively impaired. There are some individuals who are, but that doesn't represent all individuals with disabilities. And our job in a society is to create opportunities for every individual to fulfill their potential.
I have a young friend who has cerebral palsy. She's going to be graduating very successfully from high school, and I'm amazed to hear that you offer services up to age 26. She will go on to college. What kinds of help are available to her?
That's actually probably an area that's more challenging, because if a student graduates with a high school diploma, then they don't continue in the system. And so then it's about how they fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And there are services that provide support, but they're not nearly as extensive as what we have in the special education environment. And universities aren't held to the same standard. They need to make accommodations under Section 504, but it's a much harder battle to fight at the university than it is in a K-12 system.
What a shame. It sounds as if you're really doing such good work and extending it into a longer life and a longer learning period. Thanks.
Can I just a quick follow-up on that? So when you say you go to 26, that's only if they haven't graduated from high school by that point?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Scott, can you go back to the slide where it showed the groups of students, the first group, the largest group there?
With learning disabilities?
Right. Do you have any sort of idea what the percentage of those groups are?
I do not have that off the top of my head. It's data we could get for you if you'd like to see.
It just seems to me that what I've been hearing in terms of devil's advocacy in terms of this millage is the remaining students have disabilities that range from mild to severe, and I think the perception is special education is mild to severe. So if the largest group of students is learning disabled students, that's a gross misperception in terms of where these dollars are actually going.
Right.
I would agree with you, Jane, but I also, thinking about, I have a neighbor whose son has cerebral palsy. So he fits into that severe that I think a lot of us think about when we talk about disabilities. And when I talk to her about the needs of the family and of their son and all of that, I'm okay with spending that money for him, for the bus, special bus that has to come pick him up out in no man's land and take him. I think he goes into Ann Arbor every day, and because the services available in Manchester are not what
Right.
he would need.
Right. And so that's one of the challenges of local school districts is we must provide all services for any child that has a disability. So like I said before, it's a continuum.
Okay.
So we have students with just a mild speech and language impairment, somebody who maybe can't say their R's and yet developmentally that they should be past that. So we might provide speech and language therapy to that child a couple of times a week. But then we might have someone who has, medical needs as well as cognitive needs. And so those students, there's much less they're called low incident,
high cost
students, but they're going to our countywide programs because Manchester may only have one student that has those particular needs for us to create a program would be cost prohibitive.
Sure.
So that's why we rely on the ISD for those types of programs.
But I think about when she talks to me about the needs that he has, but also not wanting to cut him off from other children,
Right.
and he's got to be about 19 now, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood. I lose track of time. But that, throughout his lifetime, that she has wanted to make sure that he's been able to be included in things, and that because he has some abilities, not, obviously with that severe an issue, he doesn't have a lot, but she doesn't want him totally separated from the rest of the world. And so being able to send him to a school, to a program that he can be in during the day, and not just be sitting at home, being
Right.
babysat by a television or something. That, to me, I think all of the other stuff, even the little stuff, the speech impairments and that kind of stuff, are very important. But I also think that leaving behind people who traditionally got left behind, who didn't have services, that to me is extremely important.
And I know a lot of the programs at the ISD, like High Point, for instance, they have extracurricular activities for those students. I know they just had a prom recently. So, we're including those students and providing a lot of services for them, not only at school, but then within the community.
And the research is clear that everyone benefits in an inclusive environment, that it helps build empathy and understanding. So if now we could all take for granted our ability to walk into this room, but if you're wheelchair bound or if you have a visual impairment, you have a different experience of reality. And if you're going to school with children who have disabilities like that, you begin to realize over time, first, they're people just like the rest of us that also want friendship, also need that human connection. And quite frankly, one day, one of us might experience that either personally or with someone in our family, and we want the same for them as well.
Sure.
And so this really does reflect how much we value people in our community, the way that we can provide these types of services and supports.
One point I can address to answer your question a little bit is that although that is the largest group of students, we are still required to service them with teacher consultant support and in some cases paraeducator support. And in our budgets, about 85% of our budget goes towards staffing. And so we have 15% left to do what we need to do in the schools. And so we're still, even though that's a large number there, and so you might be thinking, well, you're getting this reimbursement back, but there's a smaller number of really high needs students. There's still this need for staffing for that number of students, and that really drains your budget.
I was just thinking more along the lines of the argument being that, right, the rising tide lifts all boats, but a large number of these students aren't what an average person may have
In
the
their mind.
conception of as special needs.
Right.
So it's helping a greater number of students than they are perceiving.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep, you're right.
One in seven number is pretty powerful to think about.
Yeah.
So if you've got a room of 21 students, likely 3 of them
Yes.
are receiving some kind of services as opposed to being able to say, so you look like a special ed kid,
Exactly.
right?
Right,
Kind of
exactly.
thing, that it could be anyone in the classroom.
Yeah.
I would share a little bit of a personal story of how our family is experiencing what we're talking about and why I certainly am a strong supporter of this. Although my daughter and son-in-law live in Seattle, my grandson was born with what's called HLHS, but it's a half heart syndrome. He does not have a functioning left ventricle, and he's on a surgical program that requires 3 open heart surgeries. He has had the first 2. The first one was 16 days old, and has been through a lot of physical issues. He was born with a cleft palate and a cleft lip. He's had all that surgery to correct that. In addition, my daughter is a second-grade school teacher, and so she has been just absolutely determined and devoted, like all these elementary school teachers are, to make sure that he developed as normally as possible. And you know, one of the first challenges for the kids with that type of disability is simply to get off the morphine, off the
Right.
drugs, to go through the withdrawal process, which is extremely painful for the child, but for the parents as well. You have to be determined, and they did that, and they were able to get him enrolled in a program that is run by the University of Washington, which is in that 0 to 3-year-old category. And part of it is because it was speech therapy. They could work on his speech. It is also integrating him with, I guess you'd say, able-bodied kids that are not part of the special needs. It's a mixed program, and certain percentage of them, like my grandson, have the plan, whatever, I don't know the terminology.
Right.
You know, I'm on dangerous territory with that. But the fact is that, and he turns 3 years old day after tomorrow, by the way. And so then he's kind of transitioning out of this program. They had some concerns because he's supposed to now go from the preschool, I think, to a nursery school
Right.
type program.
Right.
They were concerned he was going to have to drop out of this program immediately. Well, they found out that there is a slot where he can stay through the end of this term and then go on to the nursery school that's there. But it's a astounding program, and it's amazing what can be done. But my point is that partly as a testimony to my daughter's dedication as a teacher, is that he has tested normal development. He is just the sharpest, coolest little kid that you can believe. But when I talked to her this morning, a year from now, he has his 3rd surgery that he's facing. But now he's older, and this is going to have a
Right.
lot harder
Yeah.
effect on, again, him and his parents.
Yeah.
But I know that when Jody was teaching, she talked often. She was a 1st grade teacher for the first 10 or 11 years, and then she moved up with her class a few years back and spent 2 or 3 years as a 2nd grade teacher before she had the baby. And I know that she talked about special needs students that were within her class and the resources that she had available to be able to ask for consultation, to meet, and to, in some cases, help parents recognize that they had an issue that they were not necessarily addressing. So our family experiences
Right.
this right now and believe in the value of this. We need to spend the money to make sure these services are there.
That's a powerful testimonial. Thank you,
Yeah,
Ken.
thank you.
I have another question for you. Do you know where we stand in funding versus other states?
Well, other states, it depends, partly because I think we're the only birth through 26 state.
Sure.
There are other states that will start at birth and not do just a 3 through 21. And so we try to do some comparison. Where Michigan falls short, and I would say woefully short, is in investing in birth through 3. So we have a little bit of money for early on, actually no state money really. It's taking Part C funding from the special education sources, so not enough to cover the cost. And the truth is, the earlier we can intervene, you get speech and language impairment, other developmental delays, with the support of an occupational therapist or a physical therapist, a lot of those early delays can be mitigated so that by the time those young people get into school, they're on track with their typically developing peers. So early intervention makes a big difference. That's where I think Michigan falls notably short. In fact, the Auditor General did a review of our early on programs and indicated that we're underfunded by at least $40 million in the state. But we're able to do more with resources in our own counties. We don't have many opportunities to be able to impact our own future with respect to how we invest in education. This is one limited opportunity that we have under the current rules to be able to invest more in Washtenaw County.
And how about where we stand versus the rest of the state?
So in terms of a millage rate, we cover, there's a wide continuum because it depends on what property values are. So some places have to levy very high amounts in order to generate a lower amount of money. So in that respect, our current levy is probably mid-range at the state level, and we'd probably be in the upper 25% if and when this is approved. I will say that last May, Kalamazoo County approved a 1.5 mil increase, and they did that on the same ballot as the roads proposition.
Wow. Good for them. Part of why I asked that question about within the state is I have another neighbor who has a son who has Down syndrome. He is in the Manchester school system. They were, at the time that he was born, considering moving to another area in the state, somewhere on the west side of the state, and decided to stay because they felt that the services here were going to be better for him than if they moved to where they were considering moving to. I think the husband gave up a pretty good job potentially to stay. So I was thinking about, you know, if we're that badly funded and yet they chose to stay here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about the range, and I don't have the exact numbers, so think about it as a range. On a per pupil basis for special ed millage costs, so dividing against the whole general ed population, not just students with disabilities, some intermediate school districts are able to generate $250 to $300 per student. Others are just over $1,000. So that's the variability in the state. And it's an inequity that exists largely because we're dependent on property tax value and then whatever that millage rate is to support it. We're better off than a lot of our colleagues, but we still have this unfunded liability of $24 million that has a real impact in terms of what our local districts can do.
Sherry, you were going to say something?
I was just going to, I mean, as you're talking about the differences around the state, one of the things that Washtenaw County has been known for is our amount of inclusion. And we really take it very seriously and really advocate for our students to remain in their local school districts as long as they can, and we have the support for them to be successful. We know that from looking at research, we know students are more successful if they can remain with their general education peers.
Well, and I have seen him in his classrooms when I've been in to help out with the children's gardens, and
Yep.
the teachers who work with him are great, and the students, his fellow students, are really good, and I think that's a great experience for them to be able
Absolutely.
to understand the difference for someone like him, and have that empathy that you were
Right.
talking about earlier, and so that inclusion part,
Right.
I think is fantastic.
Any polling, any feeling for where the millage is at in terms of its?
So the polling data that we have was before we decided to put the question on the ballot, and that data indicated generally a significant number yes and leaning yes of the sample. I think we sampled 600, and in Washtenaw County, people two things: one, generally are inclined to support education, and have almost always supported special education services. So we felt good about the preliminary numbers. Our concern is how many people remember to vote on May 3rd. If it's a really nice day and they get busy doing something else and they forget to go to the polls, that could make a difference. The absentee voter ballots that go out automatically have already gone out. And so what's really important is to make sure that people remember this is on the ballot and they show up to vote and hopefully support our young people with disabilities.
I was just going to add another sort of positive testimonial. I have a 10 and a 12-year-old that go to the public charter, Honey Creek charter, that houses with ISD and the High Point
And High
students. And they've been there since kindergarten, and since kindergarten, they have each of their classrooms have been integrated with High Point curriculum. They've worked in the greenhouse, they've worked in the community garden, they've worked on the playground, they've had mentor buddies, they've had reading buddies. They have been so normalized from both sides, and my kids and the kids at Honey Creek have just benefited tremendously from the mild to severe, side of that spectrum. So, yes, it's a millage that supports special education, but I can testify that it absolutely supports my kids as well.
And it's a really good point. That partnership is unique in the state. Most facilities that serve the students that we serve at High Point with severe medically challenged students and those kinds of, they're not in an integrated environment with typically developing peers. To have K-8 students in there in a general ed environment interacting with our kids with the most severe disabilities, that's a unique model across the state and a fantastic opportunity both ways. So I'm so glad you pointed that out.
So what do we do? What can we be doing to get the word out and to get people to vote?
So for people who want information, they can go to the WISD website, washingtonisd.org. And the top left-hand corner, a drop-down button will appear. You click on it, and almost every question you could think of would be available to be answered in terms of our FAQ. If there's something you wonder that's not answered there, you just fill out a little dialogue button on Let's Talk, and we'll be able to respond to that. We also are continuing our advocacy campaign, trying to get information out to people. There's a mailing that will be going out shortly to a significant number of likely voters throughout the county. But really, social media, Facebook, Twitter, any way that you connect with friends and neighbors to remind them to vote, to remind them of the importance of the vote and what it means for our students and our schools across Washtenaw County would be huge.
Okay.
The first mailer that certainly we got was targeted to whom?
Absentee voters. So if you had voted absentee anytime, I think within the previous 5 years, you were on the list that we drew from to send that out. So we know some people don't normally vote absentee, but have done it within the last 5 years, and so they got that. But it went to everyone who's on the permanent AV list, plus those who had voted within a relatively recent period of time.
When is your phone bank taking place and where?
It's here
Okay,
on May 1st. What I don't remember is the time.
okay.
So if you shoot me an email, I'll find out what time that is. But we really appreciate their willingness to create that opportunity, and we're soliciting volunteers from our union at WISD and others to come in and participate, because that phone call on a Sunday as a reminder could make a big difference.
Is that information on the website?
Probably not yet for two reasons. Well, it wouldn't be on our website because it's advocacy.
Right.
We can't use
Right.
public resources for advocacy. I'm not sure that it's on the Friends of Education Facebook page yet, but
Okay.
we'll make sure that it gets up there
Would
somehow.
you get that to me so we can post it to our Facebook page, please?
Okay?
Send it to the Washington Democrats as well.
We can do that.
And if you need a distribution point for yard signs or other information, as I mentioned to you, Scott,
Right.
then we're happy to have a drop spot in Dexter, right there on the main drag. And I mentioned that we'll check with the city to see about putting
Thank you.
yard signs out, because that would be a good location for that kind of activity as well.
And Scott, I'm happy to offer my store as a pickup spot in Chelsea.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions? Well, we really appreciate
Thank
your support, your commitment, and your dedication to being here, getting information, and helping get the word out. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
much.